Okay, guys. Let's make a start. Good morning. Everybody bright and breezy this morning. You were staying up last night looking at the challenges of deep sea mining, thinking about serious farms. That's probably why you were late this morning. Right, today, the next hour, I'm going to lead you through regulatory development. So, you need to bear in mind that the Convention and the 1994 Agreement sits on top of all this. I'm going to speak to you about how we are operationalising the Convention and the 1994 Agreement. So how all this is going to start working in practice. So I'm going to take you through 5 things. We'll have a look at some features of the exploration regulations, which have been prepared under the Convention and the 94 Agreement. We'll have a look at regulatory development, what's happening at the moment. We'll then take a look at environmental considerations, which are a key component of deep sea mining activities. Then we'll have a discussion on challenges of serious harm. I've left that to the end because as I go through, you'll start to see the challenges that we face, and then some takeaways for you to consider. So let's have a look at some features of the exploration regulations. So we've gone through a process to approve contracts for exploration. I took you briefly through that process yesterday. There are at the moment some 28 exploration contracts that have been signed. I don't know why I can only count 27 on the ISA website, so either it's my counting or there is one missing. So I'm sure there are 28 exploration contracts. As you can see, these are across a broad range of either sponsoring states, or state enterprises, or states themselves. So a number of European companies and states, small island developing states are quite a significant part of the exploration contracts, and then non-EU, ranging from Russia, India, Korea, China, and Japan and Brazil. So 28 exploration contracts currently in existence. Most of those are in that Clarion-Clipperton zone in the Pacific Ocean. So the mining code at the moment consists of 3 sets of exploration regulations and prospecting regulations for polymetallic nodules, polymetallic sulfides, and cobalt-rich crusts, or ferromanganese crusts. So they just cover the prospecting and exploration phases. The processes are relatively similar across the 3 sets of regulations, but there are some differences because obviously there are different resource types. At the moment, exploitation mining regulations are under development, which is my job at the moment. So prospecting allows for searching for mineral deposits, but there are no exclusive rights. In fact, that can probably be done under the guise of marine scientific research, under the convention, ICs. Exploration, if an exploration contract has been signed, then that gives both exclusive rights to that particular area for exploration, and it also gives what's called a preference and priority in the application process for a future mining contract. So a preference and priority over other applicants for exploitation rights within that defined area. Some standard contract terms. I won't run through them all. You'll get a copy of the presentation so you can see them all there. But the key is there's a 15-year duration and possibility of an extension of 5 years in exceptional circumstances. Those exceptional circumstances is where a contractor can show that it was beyond their reasonable control that they were unable to fulfill the exploration obligations within that 15-year period, or where there are prevailing economic circumstances which doesn't yet allow them to proceed to exploitation. There is progressive relinquishment. I'll explain that to you a little bit, well, I think it's the next couple of slides actually. So contractors are given a significantly larger area, and over a period of time they have to relinquish that down to a smaller area. Preference and priority was mentioned, and then there's dispute settlement if any disputes arise under that contract in accordance with the convention. So, if we have a look at exploration for polymetallic nodules, principally looking at the Clarion-Clipperton zone area, what contractors or applicants have to do is they have to present two sites of arguably equal value to the Legal and Technical Commission. So a total area of 300,000 square kilometres. One of those sites will be chosen by the Legal and Technical Commission and put into a bank, and it's called a reserved area. And that reserved area is only capable of further exploration or exploitation by developing states. One of the key themes of this convention is the participation of developing states. So this is a methodology to encourage and promote developing state participation in activities in the area. The contractor then goes off to explore 150,000 square kilometres, and over a period of time, over a period of years, this is relinquished down to an area of 75,000 square kilometres. To put that into perspective, ironically, Jamaica itself is an area of about 75,000 square kilometres. So this is a huge area to explore. But that area doesn't need to be continuous. It can be made up of different areas. One application that was made by Chinamin Metals last year, they are now a contractor, they chose 8 different areas within the Clarion-Clipperton zone that are far apart from each other, but making up to a total of 75,000 square kilometres. Another example, Cobalt Ridge Crust, all I'll say about that one, but this involved very complicated negotiations with the International Seabed Authority in terms of the area of relinquishment for Cobalt Ridge Crust. But as you can see, the area is much, much smaller. It reduces to about 500 square kilometres. Not least because these are very rich in mineral deposits. You think about the nodules, they're spread out across huge areas. And then these are the reserved areas. So as I said, these reserved areas, I think they're in light blue here. So these reserved areas are reserved and are available to developing the state. This commercial arm of the International Seabed Authority, the enterprise, or maybe a private entity that's been sponsored by a developing state. So, for example, Tonga. There is a company, Tonga Offshore Minerals Limited, TOML. TOML is actually a Tongan company, but it's owned by a Canadian company, Nautilus Minerals, but sponsored by the Tongan government. So they're able to access reserve areas through that sponsorship arrangement. The most important elements during and towards the end of exploration, one of the key elements, aside from collecting geological data and identifying what mineable areas there may be at the bottom of the ocean, one of the key elements of exploration is to gather data for environmental baselines. Environmental baselines are literally looking at the sea floor and identifying what flora and fauna there are there before any activity occurs. Those environmental baselines are very key as an input into environmental assessment, which will look at the impact of deep sea mining activities. It allows the opportunity to develop, but also conform with best practices. The application of the precautionary approach, which I'll come on to. There's a significant amount of annual reporting that the contractors have to go through, and that data and information is submitted to the Seabed Authority. One thing the Seabed Authority has not been very good at is archiving that data, and that is a process that they're going through at the moment in terms of setting up a data management strategy and data management implementation, which will ultimately allow the public to go in and access non-confidential information. So that's in process at the moment. Monitoring of the marine environment, evaluation, and if under exploration a contractor wishes to go test mining or test various components of the mining equipment, then there needs to be a prior environmental impact assessment study concluded. Unfortunately, at the moment, there's no refined or detailed process for that. So that's something that needs to be finalized. Exploitation and regulatory development. So this is what's ongoing at the moment. One thing that the authority is going through, or will go through under its new Secretary General, starting with the 1st of January, Michael Lodge, is to put together a strategic plan. The authority has never had a strategic plan. So that's something that's been called for by member states, and also under an Article 154 review that's ongoing at the moment. So I've been working with Michael on developing the strategic plan. So some elements that are coming out of that, I mean, these have yet to be finalised and decided, but some of the objectives will be to develop a comprehensive, stable but adaptable legal framework to take care of the commercial side and put everything on an environmentally sound footing. That's the biggest challenge that the authority has, is to ensure that it recognises that these are commercial activities, but they need to be on an environmentally sound footing. So that will need to draw on existing scientific knowledge and best international practice. This is another thing I've been working on as well, is developing a payment mechanism. So when we move to mining, exploitation of those mineral resources, the contractors will need to pay the authority for the extraction of those resources. Those are owned by the common heritage of humankind, and a payment needs to be made for that. That is a very complicated payment mechanism that we're trying to get to grips with. It needs to be as simple as possible, but we have many different entities involved. We have states, we have state enterprises, we have commercial investors. So we're trying to come up with a payment mechanism that is equal and fair for everybody, but at the end of the day also fairly compensates humankind for the extraction of those resources. That payment mechanism also needs to encompass environmental incentives to promote good environmental behaviour. That could be through a stick approach, by putting in place environmental fees like an environmental tax and various funds, or it could also be allowing credits for any innovative environmental technology that's introduced by the contractors. And also we need to develop an authority that is fit for purpose, is publicly accountable, and is a mining supervisory body. This mining supervisory body, if you have opportunity to read the Article 154 review, which is on that reading list somewhere, you will see that some people are calling for an independent mining inspector. We don't know what they mean by an independent mining inspector. But in terms of the structure of the authority, there's arguably already good governance within that structure. You've got 168 member states sitting on top of this organisation. You've got a cross-selection of the international community sitting on the council. You've got independent experts sitting in the Legal and Technical Commission. they should be in a position under the principles of good governance to effectively supervise in conjunction with the sponsoring state. This isn't just the responsibility of the International Seabed Authority, it's also a responsibility of the sponsoring state. So there's many different parties who are involved in this regulatory process. So, in terms of where we've been with regulatory development, we started in July 2013 with a technical study. And then over the last couple of years, we've been through a number of stakeholder consultation processes where we've asked the international community to provide input and their ideas and expert opinions on the development of a regulatory regime. This has also included the setting of a number of high-level issues and priority deliverables by the Legal and Technical Commission. Also, one key aspect of this process is transparency and participation. This is going to be a key element of both the regulatory development process, but also when we move to mining. That process and the mining activities need to be as transparent as possible, so that there is public participation in this process. That's not just a question of the common heritage of humankind that's calling for that, but best international practice now is calling for transparency in the mining industry and generally the extractive industries, whether it be timber, whether it be fishing. Transparency is a key part of this process. If you have a look at land-based mining companies, when I was working in the mining sector 25 years ago, transparency was there, but certainly not as much as it is now. I mean, any mining company that simply operates for profit in the 21st century without any consideration of social or environmental considerations will go to the wall. It's a very key component of any extractive industry now, transparency and public participation. So that's a key theme that we're generating. In May this year, we had a number of workshops which started on the payment mechanism and looking at environmental management. As I mentioned earlier, there's this significant Article 154 review, which is looking at elements of the structure and the functioning of the authority. The structure is pretty much determined by the Convention, as amended where necessary by the 1994 agreement. But there are a large number of recommendations in there that have been made by cross-selection of stakeholders, and those will be presented to the Assembly of the Authority, to Member States. If they adopt those recommendations, then we need to bring those into regulatory development. In July, we issued the working draft exploitation regulations. Those went out for public consultation. The closing date, well, I looked last night at something I drafted. I put down the closing date as Friday the 2nd of November. Well, the 2nd of November is today. It's Wednesday. So I just hope my drafting of the exploitation regulations isn't as bad as my dates on a calendar. So, well, it potentially gives people 2 days grace. So, if you have opportunity and you're interested, please have a look through those. I mean, comments will still be open. You're as much a part of this process as anybody else, as I mentioned yesterday. There's a further workshop on transparency, and there'll be more workshops on transparency. It's an absolutely key element of this process, now and going forward. And then in 2017, we'll look at delivering a strategic plan. We've got to start drafting the environmental regulations. There will be 3 separate sets of regulations. Exploitation, which includes the standard contract, environmental and seabed mining regulations. But we may bring them all together at the end of the day. What's unique about the authority, if you have a look at most of your states, most of your countries, you'll probably find that any mining or extractive industries are dealt with by one particular department. So So the issue of a mining license might be from the Ministry of Mines, but you might require an environmental permit which will come from the Ministry of the Environment. You've got those separation of powers and functions. The Seabed Authority, that's not necessarily the case. You've got one legal and technical commission. So it would be an integrated decision-making process, which in my humble opinion, not only my opinion, is a good thing. Sustainable development is not a separate three pillars, they're together. And quite often what you find is, and I've seen this in one country, I won't mention which, but it's next to Australia. It's been going through some offshore mining decision making. Now yes, some of the applications that have been submitted haven't been very good, and the companies haven't done their homework. They need to do more exploration work, more environmental baseline studies. But the problem there, they seem to have over-regulated on the environmental side. That's one of the problems when you start to over-regulate. Sustainable development overall starts to suffer. But that's a personal view, personal opinion. And then we'll revise the exploration regulations as a consequence of stakeholder input. Environmental strategy, the environmental regulations, which will be very key, very important. We'll develop a number of guiding principles which will guide the development of the environmental strategy and regulations. Those will vary from best available scientific evidence, best available science, best scientific information, the precautionary approach, best available techniques and environmental practice. As Gabrielle, I think, mentioned on Monday, an ecosystem-based approach. I'm not sure the lawyers fully understand this sometimes, but I think the scientists are comfortable with it, I think. And then the principle of mitigation hierarchy. So mitigation hierarchy is something that's used in environmental management. On the right-hand side there, so there may be circumstances where there'll be need to avoid or prevent particular activity, not least if it has the potential to cause serious harm to the marine environment. Minimization. I can't even see that. What does that say again there? Rehabilitation, restoration, and then offset. Rehabilitation, restoration, at the moment for the deep sea is questionable. Very questionable. Some scientists believe that there may be possibility around vents to introduce some form of substrate to assist in rehabilitation. But as far as the abyssal plains are concerned with nodules, it's not technically feasible as we speak at the moment. So those substrates will be removed from the bottom of the ocean and not capable of being restored. Some people are talking about concrete blocks and things, but it's all a little bit abstract at the moment. So it may be that the final one sitting down here is offsets. So there may be a need to do some offsets. It's something that De Beers, the marine diamond company, who are extracting diamonds from the ocean floor off the coast of Namibia and South Africa, they recognise that they cause damage to the bottom of the ocean when they're dredging up all this sand. But they do a number of offsets both on land and on the coast, which is effectively compensation for any environmental damage that they can cause. But the general principle and the mitigation hierarchy is that damage should be rectified at source. But at the moment, the technical feasibility of that happening, as I said, is questionable. Environmental considerations. Unfortunately, I'm not sure who that copyright belongs to. I got it off the Seabed Authority website. So, unfortunately, in the 21st century, we have a habit of putting pictures up that we find on Google. Strictly, everything should have a copyright or a credit or something. Anyway, so that gives you a picture of some of the deep sea biodiversity that's down there. And we still don't know enough. As I said there, the flora and fauna is different at each different resource location, so we need to consider impacts of those different habitats of those particular resource locations. They're completely different. If you have a look at vent communities, there's a huge range of biodiversity living off those black smokers. Whereas if you move to the abyssal plains, so the bottom of the Clarion-Clipperton zone, you're looking at fairly lower diversity and a lot of microbial life forms. Huge number of microbial life forms. So different depths, different formal communities, different technology, different disturbance characteristics, and different vulnerabilities of fauna. The one thing that the authority has been spearheading is taxonomic standardization. What was happening a few years ago was contractors in the Clarion-Clipperton zone might find one particular creature here, and another contractor would find the same creature here, but they were calling them different names. Yeah? So we need to know how standard and representative biodiversity is within a particular region. And then environmental management measures to be put in as appropriate. So we just take a broad look at what some of the impacts of deep sea mining could be. You potentially got noise, although some studies have been done, certainly in Papua New Guinea around vents, is the vents and potential volcanic disruptions are more noisy than the mining activities themselves. But noise is also a consequence of frequency. Frequencies are also an important thing, particularly when you're looking at things like marine mammals. So noise is one thing, frequency is another. There is the potential for those riser pipes there to burst, and for the contents that come from the bottom of the ocean, further up the chain, to pour out. But you're never going to come to a deep water horizon scenario here, because all they will do is they'll shut off the pump. End of story. So it will be a temporary situation. Coming down to the bottom of the ocean, the potential impacts here. As you can see here, what that's trying to stimulate are sediment plumes. So as that mining collector moves across, it will create a plume of sediment behind it. So what contractors are doing at the moment, what the experts are doing at the moment, is they're modelling these sediment plumes to see how far they will go and where they will redeposit, depending on ocean currents. And then you'll obviously have noise vibration, potential discharges at the bottom of the ocean. So I think pretty much people are aware as to what the different activities could be, but it's then a question of defining what the impacts will be and the level, the seriousness of those impacts. So, responsibilities for the ISA contractors and states. Article 145, as I mentioned yesterday, the ISA has to regulate to prevent damage to flora and fauna. Outside of Part 11, there is an obligation on states to protect and preserve the marine environment under Article 192. Article 147, James has mentioned this morning this concept of due regard. Under Article 147, the activities have to show reasonable regard for other activities in the area, and other users in the area also have to show reasonable regard for activities in the area. What the difference is between due regard and reasonable regard is, I haven't got. One of the important things is this advisory opinion by the Seabed Disputes Chamber. I suggest you do read that. It's a very, very good read. Very easy, as I mentioned yesterday. But the three key elements of that are the legal obligations of conducting an environmental impact assessment, the application of best environmental practice, and also the application of a precautionary approach. The precautionary approach is one of those things that's been debated by lawyers for about 20 years. And I don't know about you, but when I did my thesis a few years back, I got tired of reading articles about whether the precautionary approach was part of customary international law. So many articles, so many. The most important thing of the precautionary approach is how it's going to be put into practice. Not the theoretical debate over it, how is it going to apply in practice? That's the most important. That's what I'll come on to next. Prior EIA, mentioned before, and I'll see ongoing monitoring programs and inspection by the authorities. So it doesn't just stop with the application process. There's going to be significant monitoring requirements expected of contractors. Those will be reported back to the authority, and certainly where it relates to the environment, that will be made available to the public. What's the precautionary approach? Who's going to be brave and tell me what the precautionary approach is? Anyone? What is the precautionary approach?
Precautionary approach in environmental management is like considering mitigation of potential environmental impacts before and after, and most times it gives some allowable opportunity for all stakeholders participation and allowances for unexpected events.
I couldn't have said it better myself. That really is the practical essence of the precautionary approach. Thank you. It's legal concept, and again, people say this is soft law, it's not hard law. It's a legal obligation. It's going to be in the environmental regulations. So the Rio Declaration was the starting point in order to protect the environment. It should be used widely, applied by states according to their capabilities. That's a bit of a concern, according to their capabilities. We'll glance over that one. Where there are threats of serious or irreversible damage, lack of full scientific certainty shall not be used as a reason for postponing cost-effective measures to prevent environmental degradation. Some people have argued that the precautionary approach stops you from doing things. It doesn't. It simply doesn't. The precautionary approach was developed under the guise of sustainable development. I mean, this was the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development. So the precautionary approach by itself does not stop you from doing an activity. It may be that your decision-making process itself results in that, but the precautionary approach itself is not there to stop or prevent activities. So, looking at the practical aspects of it, coming back to what we were saying, this is something that's been put together by a very clever lady in Macquarie University, Dr. Aileen Jacob. Aileen, she's just completed her PhD, and her PhD thesis has been about the application of precaution in deep-sea mining activities. And she's done an absolute magic job. So at a couple of workshops I've been to, she's presented this as the application of the precautionary approach, certainly from the perspective of the International Seabed Authority, comprising essentially three elements. Protective measures, so measures, for example, to protect vulnerable marine ecosystems, which is yet to be defined. It may have been defined in other parts of the world, but we need to be careful. We're in part 11 of the Convention. There may be different elements to that definition. Procedural measures, so the importance of an EIA process, application criteria, adaptive management and standards. Adaptive management is a tool that is an application of the precautionary approach. It's quite often called learning by doing. Environmentalists don't like it. It basically means that sometimes you do cause damage, which you then learn from. But that's the nature of human activities. Whether it's applicable to deep sea mining or not, there's a question mark over it. These are commercial activities. You can't keep starting, stopping. So we're going to have a look at adaptive management and how relevant it is to deep sea mining activities, or is it simply a question at the end of the day, it's good management? A good company operates good management practices. None of our contractors want to go out there and seriously damage the marine environment. That's not their intention. So they will already have good management practices in place to avoid that. Institutional measures. So these LEIAs, inspectorate. But as our friend said here, one of the most important aspects of the application of precaution is transparency and participation. So the authority needs to be in a position to provide information and data, to allow public access to that information and data, certainly as regards environmental decision making, and to allow participation in that process. This is something that's been put together by Dan Jones at the National Oceanographic Centre in Southampton. I stole it from one of his slides, he doesn't know. Dan's a marine scientist, an extremely capable marine scientist. I just want you to focus more on this side than anything else. This is just looking at the approaches, management approaches to managing environmental impacts. So the most important thing at a project level will be an environmental risk assessment, which will look at the likelihood and the consequences of an impact. Moving to the environmental impact assessment itself and a statement that will be submitted as part of the application process, and then the environmental management and monitoring plans. So the ongoing monitoring and management of the marine environment, which will last beyond the cessation, the stopping of mining activities. We don't know how long for. 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, don't know. I mean, these nodules, for example, have taken 1 million years to grow. So how long do we continue to monitor that environment for? There we go. And then on the right-hand side, these are what is called the sectoral tools. So what we'll end up putting in place is we'll have, I went to a workshop in Brisbane in May. I've never seen such utter confusion over definitions of strategic environmental assessments, regional environmental assessments, regional environmental management plans, strategic environmental management plans. And I was just saying, guys, please, can we keep it simple? Let's keep it simple so we can all understand. But fundamentally, what will happen on the right here, whatever we call them, is there will be very important regional environmental management plans in place. And those will speak to the individual project plans and environmental impact assessments. So there'll be certain things that will be required on a regional basis that will have to happen on a project level basis. Equally, the strategic assessment will also include shipping, it will include fisheries, it will include payments. I think it was Roland who mentioned yesterday about submarine cables and pipelines. One of our contractors has a submarine cable going right across their area. Now that submarine cable is essential for communications. I mean, without those submarine cables, we just wouldn't have the internet. So we cannot damage those submarine cables. So we're working with the International Cable Protection Committee in terms of what rules we can put in place to avoid any damage to submarine cables. So there are other users, and there's also cultural considerations as well, which will form part of this. In the regional planning in the Clarion-Clipperton zone, and this is something that has to be carried forward to other regional areas, you'll see here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I think there's another 2 that are going to be put in place. These are called areas of particular environmental interest. They are non-mining areas in the Clarion-Clipperton zone. The idea of them is that the biodiversity will be representative within these particular zones. So there'll be no mining activity there. There'll be hopefully corridors going through these areas so that any species can move around and migrate and repopulate. But there's a lot more science that needs to go around these. But if you just simply have a look at a question of magnitude, on the left-hand side, I was talking earlier about 75,000 square kilometres. This has come out of one of the bits of reading material I sent through to you. But of that 75,000 square kilometres, certainly in the first 20 years, 25 years, maybe 30 years, those mining areas are only likely to be about 10 to 15%. There's a perception that the whole 75,000 square kilometres is going to be mined. It's not. If you have a look on the right-hand side, the right-hand side shows the difference between abundance. So there's a field where there's a huge abundance in nodules, and there's a field where there's a lesser abundance in nodules, although they may be buried under the surface. So economically, it's not going to make sense to go after everything. Also, we need to conserve the resources. Sustainable development is not just about the current generations, it's about the future generations. So we need to ensure that there's a conservation of those resources at a later stage that may be capable of being brought up in a more economic fashion. So the mining area itself is only going to be 10-15% of the exploration area, certainly for the first 25-30 years. So that sort of puts magnitude into a little bit of perspective. Just run through this one quickly. Also within the mining area itself, and please bear in mind this is an idea or a suggestion at the moment. It's put together by MINES, which is a European-sponsored initiative that has been looking at the impacts of deep-sea mining. Because obviously a number of European countries are interested in this. But just two things I want to have a look at, impact reference zones and preservation reference zones. So what we'll have here within the mining area itself is an impact reference zone. And that will look at the impact of activities on the flora and fauna. So no mining will actually occur there, but it will just be representative of the environmental characteristics. And then a little bit further afield will be a preservation reference zone. So that will be protected from mining activities with quite a significant border or corridor, and that will be there to ensure the representative and stable biota of the seabed in order to assess any changes. But these mechanisms, these tools for environmental management will be considered at a workshop in Berlin in March 2017. And fundamentally, do we want this or this? As I said yesterday, seabed mining will never replace terrestrial mining. It will supplement. It certainly won't replace. But obviously when you look at some of the impacts we're having in a terrestrial environment, a number of, I think it's Nautilus Minerals actually, have conducted a social economic assessment of mining in Papua New Guinea on the ocean floor compared to, say, an equivalent in the terrestrial environment. And the net socio-economic benefits are quite clear there. Right. Discussion. Okay. Challenges. You stayed awake all night thinking about this. So anybody want to offer some challenges? That's the easy part. The solutions are the trickier part.
Just a reflection, you touched upon this setup with the environmental agreements and you know, to be together, so you have the same structure to go together. The experience from Greenland is that at once it was separated and we ended up with the mining activities to also have the environmental impact assessment in the same ministry. But from a political point of view, it could be quite difficult to then prioritize the environmental issues compared to the economic issues because, of course, we would develop. So, do you see any problems in the setup? I recognize and I agree with you that it is for sure, it can be very beneficial for the seabed authority to bring it all together. But do you see any challenges with the environmental protection eyes that they are the losers. Can you follow me?
Oh, no, absolutely. I think the starting point is the importance of that legal and technical commission.
Yeah.
That needs, that the structure of that is going to be looked at as part of this Article 154 review. So in July, the Council said, right, we'll agree to 30 members, but we want the Secretariat and other stakeholders to have a look at how we should properly structure this. So the importance there is having a good balance between, say, the marine geologists and the marine biologists. So we need to get a good expert balance on that legal and technical commission, which I don't quite think there is there at the moment personally. So that needs to be looked at. Then when you get to the council level, you've got a lot of representative states, you know, some of which are very environmentally conscious. I mean, if you look at, say, Australia and New Zealand, you know, incredible environmental consciousness, and Australia has been a mining country. So I think once you get to the council, you're going to see that balance of views. And then you've got the Assembly sitting on top as well of 168 states. And then you've got transparency. So you've got the environmental NGOs who are going to be part of this process as well. So I think overall, good governance will assist this mechanism. Yeah. Any more thoughts on challenges? What were you doing while you were awake last night? Or you were preparing Ronan's questions? That's what you were doing.
Excuse me.
Yes.
So what about the areas which are declared as common heritage, basically like Indian Antarctica? And in those areas, how do you ascertain which country have access for mining?
Access.
It's prohibited. I know that some protocols of them are not been effective yet.
So do you mean for Antarctica?
Yeah.
When did we go from there?
Yeah.
Because I think any form of exploitation. Wasn't there a recent conservation understanding by
There are
scientists?
certain protocols also which agree that in case they want to exploit.
And I think there was a moratorium for 50 years or something. Yeah.
So
That's not
that
even.
might be because the protocols exist which don't have an enforceability. And that might be a challenge once that actually comes into the picture. People, the nations actually look forward to exploring.
I know the only other thing that's maybe you can comment on this in the Arctic. I think gas hydrates is something that's been looked at. Do they float in the water column or are they on the seafloor? They're on the seafloor. Gas hydrates, I think, have more methane in them than any oil and gas reserves that we have. And I think China's one country that's exploring those in the Arctic region. So I'm not sure how that sort of impacts the seabed cells, because most of it's EZ, isn't it? It's just a little portion of my seabed. Right. So, there was just some things I thought about last night. Data and information, that's the key one. What we know, what we don't know, what we need to know, and the adequacy of objective science and targeting gaps. So that's going to flow from the strategic plan. There needs to be some form of direction now to say, right, what do we know? What don't we know? What do we need to know? Let's target it. But the biggest issue is finding funding. It's amazing, listening to James this morning, and the word military came up in that presentation so many times. The amount that we spend on military in this world, and yet we can't even find $1 billion to do some research. We've got our priorities on. So scientific research is absolutely key. Yeah.
One thing that I noticed, and maybe you can explain me, was that the use of word in science evidence, and why not? I mean, every time we see some scientists disagree, so the science evidence, how do you define the evidence? It might be because I'm not being as...
No, I think you make a very good point, because I think the convention uses best scientific evidence or information.
Yeah, excellent.
Or it might change, but one of the challenges when we're putting together the environmental regulations is going to be the definitions. Most of the regulations themselves, probably people will feel comfortable with, but the definitions is where we're going to have differences in stakeholder opinion, not least between the legal community and the scientific community. And that's where those definitions are absolutely key that everybody understands. So arguably, best scientific evidence, best scientific information, best available science, that it should all fit together somehow. But there's going to be disagreements on the definitions. No best best. So good point. Experts, we've got relatively few. In fact, finding deep sea mining experts is like trying to find hen's teeth. They don't have any. There literally are very, very few. I mean, for example, in vents, there's one lady, American lady, Cindy Van Dover, who's an absolute expert on vents, but there's not many others. So we need to invest in future experts. We have a huge, broad stakeholder base. So we've got to try and understand collective views. We've got to try and resist unilateral trends and views. You can understand on this that some people will not support deep sea mining activities. They just won't. But most people that I've come across, including the environmental NGOs, I just say, we need more science. We need to understand more about the potential impacts of this may have. I'm not saying no. We just need to understand. Geopolitics. Politics always plays a role in these international organizations. Developing standards which are inclusive, a multi-stakeholder approach. Again, as you can see, we might have discussions over definitions and misunderstandings through definitions, let alone when we're trying to develop specific standards. The equitable sharing criteria, so how we distribute the money at the end of the day. That's going to be a challenge. Because a lot of developing states have been waiting 20, 30 years for this. This is sectorial approach, ensuring there's effective cooperation. But I think as Gabrielle's indicating on Monday, we're doing better, and there's a political will now to collaborate. Fragmentation in the discussion and debate. Again, this is a concern that we're seeing at the moment, is we're seeing a lot of articles appear which just have misinformation in them. They're not based on science, they're not based on anything. So it can cause a problem in the education and understanding process. Risks, of course there are risks. Life is a risk. We've got operational risks, environmental and economic risks. And the pricing. I mean, these investors, whether they be state enterprises or commercial investors, are going to be investing billions of dollars in these enterprises. So there's a huge economic risk in that. Mental pricing might not be there. We've also, the technology has yet to be fully proved. Can they get up from the bottom of the ocean when they need to get up from the bottom of the ocean? So lots of risks floating around this. In terms of regulation, not a pretty huge amount out there, but one of the key things is going to be remote monitoring. These operations are going to be based right in the middle of the oceans, which is a risk in itself, not least to human life and safety. But we're going to have, electronic vessel and equipment monitoring systems that feed back that information. Maybe, real time is available through the internet for everybody to see. So that's going to be important and ad hoc inspection mechanisms. And resources and capacity, that's certainly a problem with the Seabed Authority at the moment. They're a very small team, and they're dealing with 53% of the floor of this planet. And that's always my biggest fear from a commercial side. So it would not be possible for Noah to do in our day what he was permitted to do in his own. The inspector would come and examine the ark and make all sorts of objections. Mark Twain 1892. Under-regulation is not a good thing. Over-regulation is also not a good thing. Over-regulation can stifle innovation, it can stifle entrepreneurship, it can stifle sustainable development. So we've got to try and get that balance right. And fundamentally, at the end of the day, making sure that these are commercial activities based on a sound environmental footing. I think I showed that one to the Legal and Technical Commission. The reaction was the same. Serious harm. Sorry guys, we've not got much time left. So, does anybody want to say anything about serious harm? Serious harm, the problems are being created by the lawyers, as I said to you yesterday. The lawyers try and do the right thing sometimes, they try and regulate for where science is not able to assist, and they try and regulate for uncertainty. Yeah?
I have a question. Could you make the argument that it could contribute to a threat against international peace and security, and therefore against the purpose of the United Nations Charter?
If you cause serious harm?
Yeah, for them.
I suppose, I mean that's, it's possible, isn't it? Ultimately. I can't see this happening. This is a positive. I mean, we're going to get to a situation of resource scarcity. And resource conflict is going to be our biggest issue in the future. Not just metals, food security, water security, soil security. I find it incredible we don't even have a soil treaty yet. One of the most important things on our planet, we don't have a soil treaty. But no, I mean, that's a possibility. One of the key aspects of the common heritage is peaceful purposes. But that's anticipating that no military base is being put on that seabed. But arguably, it could lead to that.
And also, if you think about the nodules, you find a lot of materials in there that are used to make military equipment. And you said so yourself that military is prioritized over almost everything else. So that could also contribute to regulation, military accumulation.
That's what I call natural thinking. I hadn't thought about that in the context of serious harm. No, but I guess with the military side, the land-based, already contributes to that somehow. I mean, it's an interesting little side story. Back in 1971, I don't know whether any of you know this, but there was have you ever heard of Howard Hughes? Leonardo DiCaprio played Howard Hughes in a film. The US multi-billionaire who became a recluse. And obsessive compulsive disorder. But he built a ship called the GSF Explorer in 1971. And in today's terms, it cost about $1.8 billion US to build. Well, that ship was built and sent out to the oceans under the guise of it was searching for manganese nodules. And it was going to recover manganese nodules from the bottom of the ocean. The real reason for its building was it was actually sent out to recover a Russian submarine, which had sunk. But they never recovered that. I think it broke up as they were trying to bring that from the bottom of the ocean. So, I hope we move away from that. Serious harm is defined in the Expiration Regulations as representing significant adverse change. But if I throw that to the scientists and say, please tell me what significant adverse change means, you go, what are you talking about? So again, we go backwards before we go forwards. It's a legal concept, it's not a scientific concept, it's ambiguous. You'll see a number of, including ITLOS cases, there was the Southern Bluefin Tuna case, which argued that it should be looked at on a case-by-case basis, which is okay, but we need some rules. Who is the burden of proof on? Well, I think in these scenarios, it's the proponents of mining, it's the people who are applying for the mining application. They have to demonstrate to the sponsoring state and the authority that there will be no serious harm. But it's the criteria that the authority needs to go through to determine if that's the case. Sorry, I'm really coming outside. There's a lot of parallels that we need to have a look at with fishing here. There's a lot of work that's already being done in fishing. And not least with fishing being deep sea fishing being remote. So there are some parallels we could have a look at with fishing. and not least the FAO guidelines. And I think the key there is, but I think the key there is that there should be no irreparable damage. So hence these various tools that we're looking at to try and ensure that there's representative biodiversity in the region that can repopulate the areas in the future that are being mined. One thing we don't have yet are conservation objectives, and that Berlin workshop will start to look at that. It's very difficult to say what serious harm is if you don't know what your objectives are. What are we trying to achieve here? Where the convention under Article 192 says the protection and preservation of the marine environment, what does that mean? It's actually a meaningless article unless you've got some objectives to it. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to conserve and preserve every single creature on this planet? Well, if we're trying to do that, then sustainable development will never be achieved. But obviously there are certain stakeholders who will say that there should be no mining activity where there are unique species that you might destroy.
But don't you have to read it within the framework of the United Nations Charter? They have purposes and objectives there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think the key thing now is those sustainable development goals. What's becoming politically important now is sustainable development goals and the biodiversity targets. So I think that's the international level, those are the key things that people are looking at.
But how can they say that there can be no mining where there are new species if every people or species is very unique?
Well, it's just a question of the research that's ongoing at the moment is trying to find out, how dispersed are the various species. So, or are they unique to a
So you
particular
need to
area?
practically show areas, and when you do that, is it responsibility of the ISA or the coastal area or the country?
Well, this is going to occur far away from the coastal states, so it's going to be in the international areas. But the key to this is marine research as well, marine scientific research, to find out what is unique and what's not unique. And also this ecosystem-based approach. Again, there's an argument at the international level, and I've seen differences in terms of whether we should be focusing on ecosystem functioning or ecosystem structure. That debate's still out there, I think. So there's a whole range of issues that still need to be properly discussed within an expert community. That's the key thing. Science has to support this decision-making process. Vulnerability and resilience of ecosystems. I don't want to speak for the scientific community, but certain science is more comfortable with focusing on ecological thresholds and this legal concept of serious harm. So there will be need to have a look at threshold triggers, water quality, etc., which will need to be built into monitoring programs. Right, takeaways. There's going to be ongoing development. This is the final slide. Keep your eye on this ongoing development. If you're interested, you're all stakeholders. Watch out for future developments, and please contribute where you can. Every single one of you will have an element of expertise that can be contributed to this process. And that's what we need. There's still a huge number of people that know nothing about deep sea mining. When I talk to all my friends about it, what? That was in the bottom of the ocean. No. So it's still relatively unknown. The common heritage of humankind is sustainable development goals. The common heritage and the operationalization of that will contribute significantly to those sustainable development goals. I mean, ultimately, I trust that we're in a position where mining activities, generate significant income revenues, which can then be distributed under equitable sharing and priority. Part 11 UNCLOS, the 1994 agreement. Please read both of them together. But they don't operate in isolation, they don't operate in a vacuum. As I mentioned earlier, you've got states parties that have obligations outside the Part 11 agreement, not least that general obligation to protect and preserve the marine environment. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I tried my ISA address today. It's obviously been removed from the system. I've not been there for 3 months and it's deleted, so hopefully I'll get that back soon. But it's a fascinating project to work on at the moment. It's a fascinating journey. It involves a mix of science, of law, of economics, social economics. It's an extremely interesting project to be working on. Okay, guys, thank you very much. Any questions?
Yes,
Well, those are important considerations, but just distinguish between what's happening in an exclusive economic zone, which is, say, like Papua New Guinea. If I think it will happen in its territorial sea, it will happen in its territorial sea, versus what's happening in the area. The area is very remote from coastal states. So if you look at the Clarion-Clipperton zone, it's right in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So you've got no immediately directly affected communities. Yeah? Whereas in Papua New Guinea, you will have. And certainly Nautilus Minerals went on a stakeholder engagement exercise with local communities to get buy-in and engagement and then endorsement. Yeah? A similar thing happened in New Zealand, where a number of applications were made for phosphate mine and iron sand mine. Local communities got heavily involved. And that was, one significant factor which resulted in some of these applications being declined. But a lot of it was about the information that people were bringing in. The most important thing in any mining scenario, whether it's on land or whether it's in the ocean, comes back to this issue of transparency. You need to be transparent with the information and the impacts. But at the moment, the social considerations within the area may be less. And I say maybe because it needs to be explored. As I mentioned yesterday, there may be some cultural considerations for, say, some indigenous people who may have a close affiliation with whales. And some of these areas may be on whale migratory routes. But at the moment, the social considerations arguably in the area are less than they are close to the coastal state. Yeah. Because arguably there's no directly affected local communities. The closer that gets to the coastal state, different. But these are very remote areas. I certainly wouldn't like to be there on a mining vessel. No way.
Just a very quick reflection, maybe we can talk about it in the break, but I think it might be interesting for all of us to hear. What are your vision for the Seabed Authority with the upcoming implementation agreement on biodiversity? I mean, there's a close link, and we will have a strategic plan in 2017, and in 2018 we can expect a negotiation taking place. So, what are your vision? How do you see any links and role for the Seabed Authority?
Don't know.
Okay. I was just curious because I know there's different positions from the states parties, so it was interesting to hear your point.
Michael Lodge has been attending the BBNJ discussions, and certainly in the strategic plan, it's been a question of the subject to BBNJ. So it may be that there'll be need, maybe not for the strategic plan per se, but when it comes to things like environmental management, where we're potentially looking at marine spatial planning, for example, that may be relevant to come into here, marine protected areas, and whether at the end of the day this biodiversity will become the common heritage of humankind. Because if it is, and there's equitable sharing that comes into this as well, then the Seabed Authority may very well be the natural home for this, rather than creating another regulatory body. Because we've got so many different international regulatory bodies. That's one of the problems with that fragmentation. So, it'd be good to see that come into that moment. That's the right place for it to be. But apart from that, I'm afraid my BB&J knowledge is relatively limited to Google alerts. Yeah. But it's sort of, as it were, on the agenda and will need to be factored into development plans.
I just have a question, and maybe I missed it, but I'm interested in how the authority is kind of sort of facilitating the relationship between the mining company and the sponsor state, whether it's kind of a similar to the flag states. So I don't know exactly, I mean, particularly for like developing states who maybe some of these mining companies may take advantage of their sponsorship. So what are sort of, regulatory requirements for the mining company and the sponsor state?
Well, you raise a very, very good question, because one of the concerns, and I think this was drawn out in that HITLOS advisory opinion, the Seabed Disputes Chamber, is that what we don't want to create a sort of sponsoring states of convenience, like we have flag states of convenience. So the authority has a role to play in terms of guiding the development of national legislation. A role. It can't tell a sovereign state what to do. That's the big difference. So that relationship between a sponsoring state and a contractor is arguably non-touchable by the authority. The relationship will be between the authority and the contractor by way of contract. But certainly there will be some states where the authority will need to provide some form of technical assistance in terms of developing the legislation, and also maybe going forwards assistance in enforcement. And this issue of jurisdictional competence is very, very important. You mentioned flag states. We have a number of different entities that may be involved in enforcing activities in the area, jurisdiction. So you've got states parties, you've got sponsoring states, you've got flag states, you've got the International Seabed Authority. So at some stage what we're going to have is a workshop with all these different bodies to sit down and say, right, we need to carve out the duties and responsibilities to make sure it's clear as to who has jurisdiction over what, and how we can collaborate going forwards to ensure that necessary measures are put in place. So it's a key thing. But certain states will be good. I mean, all states are good at legislation, putting legislation in place. But then we have differences in enforcement. So those are things that we'll have to...
So in terms of liability, for any violations of these regulations, is it shared liability between the sponsor state and the mining company, or?
That will depend on the agreement. It's unlikely. Most of the risk is likely to be on the operator, as it generally always is. States don't like taking risks, so the commercial and operational liability and environmental liability probably on the operator. But have a read through that advisory opinion, because the importance of that was a small island developing state was concerned about its liability as a sponsoring state. So what are its obligations that it needs to undertake to ensure that it's not liable? Because Article 139 requires sponsoring states, they have a responsibility to ensure that the sponsored contractor, is acting in accordance with the rules, regulations, and procedures of the convention. So that advisory opinion looked at what steps the sponsoring state needs to take in terms of putting law in place and administrative steps. And as long as it's, to use their phrase, it's done its best, it's done its utmost, then it's unlikely to be liable. But the concern was that there may be a liability gap that arises if the sponsoring state isn't liable, and you may have a contractor that goes into liquidation or bankruptcy, and there's an environmental liability. Who covers that? So one thing that the advisory opinion was recommending is that a fund, an environmental liability fund, is set up, and that's something that we'll likely do. So that will be a general fund that people will have to contribute to, which will, take care of environmental liability. But that issue of liability is a whole other question as well, because we've potentially got differences here. A sponsoring state could impose strict liability. It's entitled to do that under its own national laws. It has the sovereignty over that. At the moment, the liability under the contract between the authority and the contractor, that's for wrongful conduct. So, but a liability workshop is something that I'm putting together at the moment, and we need to take those further rules and discussions forward. And I do apologise, guys, I've gone well beyond my time. My apologies.
Not at all.
Okay, guys, thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'm going to be here for the next couple of days or so. Or if you have any advice, please. If you have any expert advice, please come and see me. We welcome any views, opinions, whatsoever. We're not going to do this single-handedly. Together, we can make it happen. Thank you.